Welcome, everybody, to Mom Street USA. My name is Jackie, aka Wishes Mama, and I am joined for this hub episode of Mom Street by our good friend Stevie, aka Starship Stevie. And today we are going to be talking about something and a Disney park that we have, I don't think, ever really talked about on Mom Street, which is super exciting. Stevie is recently back from a trip over to Tokyo Disney. So we are going to be talking about 10 things to know before you visit Tokyo Disney. So that is the plan for today. Stevie, how are you doing today?
I am so good. I am still kind of recovering from jet lag. I feel like I'm on the end of it, but it was absolutely worth it because I had so much fun on this trip.
Yes, I'm so excited to hear about everything that you have to share with us today. We haven't even really gotten to talk about your trip that much,
Mhm.
just like off of live and podcasting, because you got back and a few days later I headed to Disney World. So we've been kind of all over the place, and Duck and Jess have been traveling too. So it's just been a month of travel here at Mom Street, but I'm excited we're back to a little bit more of a normal schedule for the next couple weeks until I head back to the parks again. So it'll be good to be back together and to catch up and hear what you have to share with us. So let's jump in. What are your kind of overall thoughts about Tokyo Disney and what you have to share with us today?
I am so excited to talk about it. I feel like in the future, you're going to be hard pressed to get me to stop talking about Tokyo Disney because I had such a good time. And I do want to say before we get into today's episode, in the future, we're going to do different deep dives on different aspects about the parks, about the hotels and the food and everything else that you can expect. But I thought it would be more fun to kind of start with some quick hitters, just like things that are distinctly different from the US that in all of the research that I did before I went, these were things that I kind of learned as I was visiting or learned the full depth of. Even if I kind of had hints about kind of knew to expect, I was just like, oh, okay. And once I was there, I had firsthand experience that I want to make sure everybody knows about. And it just felt like a more fun, lighthearted kind of way to ease into all things Tokyo Disney.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I feel like online in general, the international parks obviously don't have as much kind of we don't have as much access to them, right? There's not as many blogs or podcasts or social media, accounts that we can find. Disneyland Paris has a fair amount. I feel like more so than some of the other ones, but I agree. Tokyo Disney, Shanghai, Hong Kong, those ones are really hard to find information on. So that's the hope with us bringing all this information to our Mom Street community is that we can find those people that need that content to help them with their trips that are coming up.
Absolutely. I feel like most of the research that I did involved getting other quick hit kind of information from TikToks and from Reddit and from the Tokyo Disney website.
Mhm.
I do want to add, I want to shout out another podcast that really helped me a ton. TDR Explorer is the name of the podcast. He also runs an Instagram account and he is a local to Tokyo Disney and he makes incredible content about the parks and it's his home park and so he's got a very different perspective than some of the TikToks or the posts that you might see of people that are visiting it once every 10 years or they're just going for the first time and I really appreciated everything that he had to say and because it'll take us a while to put things out if you're planning a trip right now and we've not put that out yet I want to push you guys over to TDR Explorer too because I think the Disney podcasting and Disney in general works best as a community. So I know it maybe feels kind of weird that I'm shouting out another podcast, but I to me, the more the merrier, and everybody's got a different perspective. And my perspective will come from spending a lot of time after working in Walt Disney World and now going regularly to Disneyland and also having been to Disneyland Paris. Like I've got a different compare and contrast kind of perspective to bring. And so I'm really excited to talk about it and share all of this information. We all notice different things, and I'm just obsessed with this park. So I'm prepared to be a menace about everything that I loved.
I love it. Well, and yeah, exactly what you said. There's no reason why we shouldn't give those shout outs to those other people who are making helpful content, right? Especially for those that are locals, it is going to feel a lot different. They're going to point out different things than maybe the tourist quote unquote group would point out. So having a little bit of both perspectives can definitely help you, especially if you're someone that's super familiar with the Tokyo area. Hearing from a local may do you more good than hearing from someone who's not as familiar, like you said, lots of different perspectives. But if you need more or need it quicker than we can provide it for you, check out there first. And as always, if you can't find what you're looking for, send us a message. We are at Mom Street USA on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all those places, and momstreetusa@gmail.com. If you've got specific questions that you want Stevie to give you some input and help with, please send those our way. We are more than happy to help.
So I want to start this list of the top 10 things to know before you go to Tokyo Disney, with addressing the language barrier. I understand how overwhelming it might be to go to a park where the language is not English, if that's your native language. However, I found that there are 4 phrases that will get you just about anywhere in Japan. And those 4 phrases are hi, please, excuse me, and I'm sorry. If the English is the tourism language there. So, like, for example, when I checked into my hotel, the family that was next to us was also speaking English. However, they were from China and they spoke Chinese, but they also knew English. So they were checking in English because they didn't speak a lot of Japanese. And it really drove home the point to me that Japan in general, but specifically Tokyo, really sets itself up to be friendly to tourists, especially tourists that speak English. So a lot of the signs are in English, or the Japanese characters are written out in the English alphabet. And gestures will take you really far as well. So like pointing where something is on the map will get your point across. And so I'm not saying to not bother learning Japanese. It's a beautiful language and there's tons of free tools out there to help. Your library probably has free tools that you can access with your library card. I think Mango and Rosetta Stone are the 2 popular ones. And I think that learning a new language can be a really fun activity to do at home as a family. But the moral of the story is if you are kind and polite and patient, you will receive that energy in return. And so if you're able to just initiate a conversation in Japanese with a konnichiwa or a sumimasen, which is excuse me, it, it will set you up for success. And I was really pleasantly surprised that just by showing that I was trying was just enough to kind of make friends with cast members and find out ways to help. It's really great having technology that you can pull up Google Translate on your phone and type out a longer question too and translate it that way. And I found that cast members in the parks as well as employees elsewhere are also prepared to pull out their own phones to help them translate, which as a cast member in Walt Disney World, we were always discouraged from doing that, like in terms of pulling out our own phones to kind of facilitate communication. And so I found as a cast member, it was helpful for me to know some basic phrases in other languages, but I was just so excited to see the way that that culture exists in Tokyo, Japan, in
Yeah, I love that.
Tokyo Disney.
Yeah. I love that. Well, and, everyone in the live chat over here is talking about like politeness is a universal language, right? Like be polite, give it a shot and see. Okay, so those 4 phrases, tell us again the English and then tell us the Japanese just because it's fun to hear you say it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the word for hi or hello is konnichiwa. Do you want to say that back?
Oh,
Should we
I
do it in like
can.
syllables?
Yeah,
Like
I can
ko,
say ko,
ni,
ni,
chi,
chi,
wa,
wa,
konnichiwa.
konnichiwa.
Yeah, there you go. The next one is please, which is kudasai. So we're going to do it by syllables
Like,
again.
who that one's I'm not as familiar with that one. Konnichiwa, I feel like is a pretty well-known word in Japanese.
Yeah,
So, okay.
yeah. You'll see the romanization of that on like If
Yeah.
a Small World as well.
Mhm.
So please is kudasai. So ku,
Ku,
da,
da,
sai,
sai,
kudasai.
kudasai.
Yeah. And then the one that I found that I used the most of all of them, and it's a polite way to get somebody's attention, is by saying "excuse me," and so that's sumimasen, and that's a little longer. So we're gonna break it down again. Su,
Su,
mi,
mi,
ma,
ma,
sen,
sen,
sumimasen.
sumimasen.
There you go.
All
See?
right.
You got it. You got it.
Really-
And then I'm sorry. And I actually didn't use I'm sorry all of that often. It's not usually used in the context that we use "I'm sorry." I think that for the most part, the people that the moments where you'd want to say "I'm sorry," you'd usually end up saying "sumimasen" for "excuse me." So "I'm sorry" in Japanese is "gomennasai." So go,
Go.
men,
Men.
na,
Na.
sai.
Sai.
Gomennasai.
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 Nice. You did it.
Okay. Woohoo!
And I think that once you hear the language, you can kind of get an idea of the cadence of it and where the emphasis or emphasis on the different syllables will
Yeah.
go, because that really makes a difference in making sure that you're understood. But I kind of treat learning languages like music, that if you're kind of visualizing the syllables as pitches in your head and imitating it like that, I think that it's a lot easier to kind of grasp the pronunciation of different languages, especially Japanese.
Yeah, and I think there's just a different cadence to it, right? Like it doesn't feel like it's very evident probably to a lot of native Japanese speakers when someone who speaks English is trying to speak Japanese because we just have a different cadence to our general like speaking and sentence structure than they do. So I totally understand like you got to listen for where the emphasis is and where the inflections are with different languages.
Yes. And I do want to add, I don't want to get too far into our Japanese lesson, but there are a couple different alphabets and then characters when it comes to making up what written Japanese looks like. And so when I say like konnichiwa to you, there are sometimes when you look at Japanese, there is a more complicated character and it represents one entire word. Whereas there's also an alphabet system where one pictorial character represents one individual syllable. And
Mhm.
so you can actually learn like how to read the Japanese alphabet. And I find that that's really helpful in terms of reading signs and just feeling acclimated. Like you're going to feel a little more familiar with what you're looking at, even if characters do come up. And I think that learning a new alphabet can be really fun. And I think that it really helps understand where that cadence kind of falls once you learn the alphabet, because it's giving you a better idea of like how the sentence structure is really made up, if that makes sense.
Yes, I love that. Thank you for our little mini condensed Japanese lesson. That
Absolutely.
was
It's a
super
direct
fun.
course into
I
started.
know.
And I do want to add that bowing is a way to express gratitude. I mentioned using gestures as a way to kind of communicate. But even just like, and I realized once I left Japan that it was hard to get out of the habit of just doing like a little like nod as like a thank you,
Yeah.
because it's a when you are so grateful that somebody is willing to interface with you or try in English and it's not their like native language, like I want to make sure that they know that I really appreciate them doing that. And especially with table restaurants in Japan, there's no tipping culture.
Mhm.
You're not. It's insulting to leave that money on the table. And so when we went out to eat, I was just like, I want to make sure that our server knows how much we appreciated her service. And
Mhm.
so like doing a deeper bow at that point, because like when you're generally interfacing with people, it's just like a little like head nod.
Mhm.
But having that restaurant in that restaurant scenario, and after we'd finished and we were leaving, our server bowed at us and I bowed back because like and she kind of giggled in appreciation because
Mhm.
it's an acknowledgement of the customs and the culture,
Mhm.
and I wanted to make sure that she knew like how much we appreciated her
Right.
in return. And so I think that there's just something that feels so comforting about being in an environment where politeness is the norm.
Right. Yes, I love that so much. Okay. As much as I would love to listen to you
Yeah.
talk about Japanese
Mhm.
language and culture, we'll get there on a future episode. Like we said, we will
Yes.
go deeper and give more information about all of this in future episodes. But let's move on to your second thing that we need to know before visiting Tokyo Disney.
Like I said, you're going to have to stop me from continuing to talk about Tokyo Disney because I love it so much. So, the second point is early entry. Now, this is one of the items that I was aware of before we went on the trip, but I did not really understand the full depth of why it was helpful until we actually experienced it. So Tokyo Disney doesn't really do extended hours. Like Walt Disney World, for example, will kind of change when they're open. Sometimes they're open a little later or a little earlier by an hour or so. But Tokyo Disney has pretty standard hours. But for some hotel guests, they will allow you to enter the park 15 minutes early, and they call this happy entry. And it doesn't really seem like 15 minutes early is that big of a deal until you get into Tokyo DisneySea. And I say that because that park is so, so, so big. And the new fancy, exciting area of the park is called Fantasy Springs. And that area has the new Frozen ride, has Peter Pan rides, and it has Tangled ride. And so it's the place everybody wants to go. That's where the wait times are usually the longest, especially right at park open. It will take you 15 minutes from the front of the park to get to the back of the park. And so it's just a long, long walk to get over there. And you really end up making use of that 15 minutes because you've got a 15-minute head start to get back there. But the other thing to note is that you can't book any ride reservations until you're actually physically in the park and after you've scanned your ticket. So Tokyo Disney has a few Lightning Lane or Fast Pass equivalents that I don't want to get too much into because it's probably going to change pretty soon because some of them are celebrating the 40th anniversary of the park. But the main thing to know is that for any of them that they ever have, you can't book them in advance. So if you want to make use of any of those passes, you have to wait until after you've scanned in. And so that extra 15 minutes really means that you're more likely to get the reservations that you want when you want them.
Yeah, so if you're someone who's familiar with the current multi-pass lightning lane system at Disneyland, that works the same way, where everyone in your party has to be tapped in before you become eligible to be able to book your lightning lanes, your ride reservations, your fast passes, whatever you want to call them, whichever park you're in. But so different from Disney World, but very similar to the Disneyland system in which you have to be tapped in first. Okay, so we've got the language stuff, we've got early entry, happy what do they call it?
Happy
Happy
entry.
happy entry. I love that name. That makes me so happy. Okay, what else do we need to know before visiting Tokyo Disney?
So the third thing is wait times. I think that there are a lot of videos, especially on social media, about lines getting really long at Tokyo Disney. And some of the lines do get really long, but I feel like there are other caveats that are not always communicated in some of those viral videos about those lines. So, first of all of the lines that I waited in at Tokyo Disney were far more organized than any other lines I've waited anywhere else. Uh, Anywhere else. And I think that on social media, most of the videos that you see are of the park at park open,
Mhm.
and that's when you see it looks really intimidating, and it's really just because the people that are waiting don't really have anywhere else to go. Like,
Right.
you're all kind of stuck in this one area, and there's not a ton of space to spread out, and so as a result, it does look really busy and kind of chaotic because you're all in this one tiny little area.
Right.
But it is not actually as nuts as it actually, especially if you have happy entry.
Mhm.
They're so organized about getting everybody in. They're very timely. Like right at 8:45 every morning, they were prepared to let everybody through the gates, and you get in very quickly. And it it is just it's intense, but it's not frustrating, if
Mhm.
that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
it is there, but it's not something to stress out over.
Well, I feel like you film any of the parks at park open when they letting people in, and they all look insane, right? Like you see
Yes,
people running at Disneyland to get places first, and
absolutely.
no matter where you're looking, it's gonna look that crazy at the very beginning of the day.
Absolutely. And I will say that in terms of lines elsewhere inside the park, the popcorn lines will get kind of long because they have all kinds of flavored popcorn, both sweet and savory, and it's a really fun thing to kind of go around and try different popcorn flavors.
Mhm.
However, there are wait times for each individual popcorn stand in the app.
What?
and I need every other park to get on board with that.
That's so cool, though.
Right? And, like,
How
we could
helpful.
see right? We could see that there was, like, a 40-minute wait
Yeah.
for the curry popcorn, or there was a 15-minute wait for the caramel popcorn,
Yeah.
and so, because of that, my husband and I could split up and go wait in our separate lines and then meet up again because it
Yeah.
wasn't a huge deal, and
Right.
so it was an excellent feature that we absolutely took advantage of. If you do happen to see a short popcorn line while you are somewhere, you should definitely just go ahead and take advantage of it because it will probably get longer because Tokyo Disney also has really, really cool popcorn buckets. And so
Mhm.
that is also part of the draw for popcorn.
Do they have guides to what buckets are where in the parks? Like, can you see which buckets are at which stands? I'm just curious since they have the wait times.
They are on the website. I don't
Mhm.
remember whether or not they're actually on the app, but we
Okay.
were able to look up. I was with a friend in the park who was looking specifically for the Tangled popcorn bucket,
Mhm.
and we were trying to figure out which stands those were at and what popcorn they had. And
Okay. So
so
it's
we were
listed
able to in
somewhere.
advance. Yes, yes, yes,
That's
yes,
helpful
absolutely.
because the US parks is not always that way. Sometimes you get a few that are like, only at this one or only at this party or whatever, but, like, generally speaking, it's hard to know what popcorn buckets are where. So that is very
Yeah.
helpful, and it makes sense because the popcorn is such a big thing over there in those parks.
Well, and because you've got maybe 6 or 7 flavors, I think, in each park, and so that makes a difference too. I do wanna add one more thing that somebody brought up in the comments on my side, that the wait times and crowds do vary a lot on weekdays versus weekends just because of lots of locals being like, going to the park on weekends, and there are different holidays that you need to watch out for in Japan where the crowds might be higher, so that's something else to keep in mind. But generally speaking, this bullet point is all about it not necessarily being something to be as stressed about that's any worse than any other park that you might end up in.
That makes sense. Well, and it definitely gives we talked about the similarities with the fast passes or lightning lanes being like Disneyland. Well, Tokyo Disney, you're gonna find it being more of a locals park just in general because you have a good tourist population over in Tokyo, but not nearly as much as you're gonna see in, like, Orlando. So, that
Absolutely,
makes sense.
absolutely.
Perfect. All right, what else you got for us? I'm ready for number 4.
Number 4 is a language barrier part 2. I wanted as we got into the park, I'm kinda easing in the different parts of the park that you'd experience. So when it comes to the shows and the rides, most of what you're going to experience is in Japanese, but I don't want that to stop you because the quality is very impressive even if you don't understand the language. For example, you'd think that going on Jungle Cruise wouldn't necessarily be as appealing because you're not going to understand all of the puns in a language that you don't speak. Now, I wanted to see what was featured on Jungle Cruise because, as a former Great Movie Ride cast member, because I can't go an episode without mentioning that, in the Jungle Cruise in Disney World in Orlando, there is a part of a plane that's on Jungle Cruise. And that is the other half of the plane that used to be in the Casablanca sequence in Great Movie Ride. And I was very curious because there wouldn't be another half of a plane that would be in Tokyo. But I was just like, I just have to know. I just want to
Right.
know the answer. Like, are there different animatronics? Like, what has changed over there? And as predicted, I did not understand any of the jokes, but it did not matter. Our cast member, our skipper, was so animated and enthusiastic and just like jumping around and leaping all over places and just like so uh just energetic with his voice and his expressions. Like I cannot say enough good things about our skipper that you knew where the punchline was based
Mhm.
on the things that he was doing, and there was still plenty to laugh at, even though I didn't know what he was saying in Japanese. So it I don't want anybody to be like, "Well, it's in Japanese, we're not gonna do it." It is absolutely worth it, especially for the musical shows too, because music just transcends language, and you're probably already gonna know the plot. So you're
Right.
still gonna get really excellent quality and still being able to get, like, a great time out of the whole experience.
Yeah. Well, and that's the nice thing about it being a Disney park, right? Is like if you know Disney and you know the IP, you know the movies, you know the storylines, the songs, whatever, like you're going to be fine.
Absolutely. The quality is something that I think you can depend on, like, because
Mhm.
you know that it's Disney, like, there's a certain level of expectation there that Tokyo
Right.
Disney absolutely delivers on.
Yeah.
And so the costuming that in the musical shows that they do is just, like, breathtaking. There was a costume change in one of the shows that we saw, and all of the princesses came out in white versions of their outfits, and my
Ooh.
husband and I were like, it was just so, so pretty.
Yeah.
And even somebody else in the comments mentioned that's also been to Tokyo Disney that I was at in the parks at the same time with, mentioned that all of the, uh, characters and themes and, like, IP, if you will, that you may not be familiar with, will probably still make sense even with the language barrier just based on gestures and the tone of the music. Music does a great job at conveying emotion that you're still going to get the general vibe even if you don't necessarily understand what they're saying.
Yeah, that's super helpful to have that basis of the music and the storyline to help you along the way. And I will say that the thing about the Jungle Cruise that Stevie mentioned was like one of the few messages that I got from her when she was over there was like, I went on Jungle Cruise and it felt like a little slice of home over there, even though I didn't understand anything they were saying. And I was like, amazing. I love that.
It was excellent. It was excellent.
Lovely. Perfect. Okay. What's next on our list of things we need to know before we visit Tokyo?
I don't know whether or not we're all ready for it,
Oh no.
but I am excited to talk about it. And it might be weird that I am excited to talk about it because we're going to talk about bathrooms in Japan. And I know that it might sound weird that I'm talking about bathrooms on a podcast, but I'm going to explain. I knew that bidets were a thing in Japan. I knew that
Mhm.
that was part of the culture. I
Yes.
did not realize that they were going to be literally everywhere. Like every
Hmm.
single bathroom that you go into was going to have a bidet.
That's
And
fascinating.
so, right? Um, and this includes Tokyo Disney. So once you experience a Japanese bathroom, you're probably not going to want to go back. At least that's how I feel about it in particular. I so let me explain some of the features because like you can buy like bidet attachments for your
Right.
toilet in the States and I think it's really helpful for in general from a cleanliness perspective, but if you can't get on board with that from a mobility perspective, like if you're recovering from surgery or, you know, whatever else, like having this as an aid is a really great thing, but there are other aspects to this bathroom that I'm partial to. The first of all being that there is never ever a gap between the stall doors where somebody can see you or you can see out. And if you've never noticed this being an issue in the US, I envy you. I,
Right?
I, I desperately envy you. I wish that I could ignore the fact that there is a huge gap in the door.
See, I it wasn't like I knew it was there. When I had kids, it was even more magnified because it's either them trying to look out or look in while you were trying to wrangle them in the stall. So,
Uh-huh.
I greatly appreciate that, and can we please adopt that across the United States, please and thank you.
Absolutely. Well, and the stall walls also go down to the floor for the most part, and so you
Amazing.
really get a sense of privacy, which leads me to my next point. The stalls at Disney usually had a white noise feature that would play as well. It was like a
Ooh,
soft running water
that's
noise.
fascinating.
I don't know if this was supposed to, like, help you go because it's a water noise, um, but I liked it because it blocks out other noise in the bathroom, and,
Yeah.
you're probably thinking because of other bathroom noises, but for me personally, like, I mean it in an I'm overstimulated and in a theme park, and it feels nice to feel, like, settled in the bathroom because there's, like,
Right.
a relaxing water noise, but I can imagine that there are lots of people that also like it because it disguises other noises, either yours or your neighbors in a stall. Like I'm not I think it's important to talk about these things. So it's a shame that we're all gonna have to go to the bathroom. If you go to Tokyo, you're gonna use the bathroom at some point.
Yep.
So I was taken aback by it at first, especially because of the third feature in Japanese bathrooms is that the seats are heated, which was took some getting used to at first, but then it rained and it was cold and it is
Hmm.
just it's nice. It's another thing that it's just like, "Wow, I didn't know I was gonna miss this," and I absolutely do. And and then obviously there's the water feature that makes a bidet a bidet. So I do wanna add that outside of Tokyo Disney, you might see a different style of bathroom, which means that there's going to, instead of having a seat with a bidet, the toilet seat is just on the ground and it's
Hmm.
basically like a hole in the ground. I only saw this when I was at the airport, and in that bathroom, they had both options. They had the ground
Hmm.
option and the seated option. So if
Interesting.
that is your understanding of Japanese bathrooms, I did not see it all the time. I did not see it at all in Tokyo Disney. And when I did see it, they had the seats as an option as well. So as a general FYI, I feel like that's just like an something that's good to know, because when I walked into the bathroom in the airport, all of the other stalls were full, and I walked in and I was just like, "Oh, I don't know that I'm prepared to use that." And then I looked at the door and there were like images like there's a seat in this one or there's not a seat in this one. And I was like,
Right.
"Okay, I can just wait for one that has a seat."
Yeah.
So that did catch me by surprise. I was not prepared, and I, want to make sure that everybody else is prepared too.
Well, and I think that's something to really consider and a good point to make, especially if you're someone that's going to be traveling with like kids or teens or young adults that have never been to Japan before or overseas before. Like that, there are some things that are very different about the United States and all these other countries. So it is a good conversation to have, like, hey, heads up, this might happen. And I may or may not be with you when this happens, but know that this is how you can handle it.
Yes. And that's actually something that I put in my notes next, because I think that it's an important conversation to have with kids in particular
Yeah.
about what a bidet is, what makes a bidet, that it's not a toy. But that I do want to add that if you have kids that want to try and like experience a different culture and use the different features, I would highly recommend waiting until you were in a hotel room to try for the first time.
Yeah.
Because when you're using, it's a toilet at the end of the day. You don't have to use any of the features. However, if you've never used a bidet before, for reference, if you are sitting in a way that does not fully like cover the seat, especially if you are a child and you're a little smaller, if the water spray is not adjusted, it could come outside of the seat and therefore make like your pants wet on the ground.
Right.
And I don't want anybody to be in that position when they're out traveling in a new country. Whereas if you try for the first time, whenever you end up having to go in the hotel room, you're in a great place to change your clothes if that's the thing that happens.
That is
So
excellent point. Excellent,
yes,
excellent point to plan that accordingly and
yes.
plan your kiddos, prepare them for when we can try it and when we're going to wait to try it.
Yes. Well, and I do think that the first couple times that you experience it, if it's a new thing, it can be a little startling.
Yeah.
And I think especially for kids, they might jump off of the seat, which is
Right.
creates a whole other issue if the sprayer is set pretty high. I I know that at the start of this might have felt like a silly conversation, but I do feel like it bears a warning. Like I love, using the Japanese bathrooms, and I missed them the moment that I touched that down in the States. Um, because the first bathroom that we went in the States, there were giant gaps between the doors, and I was just like, "Already? We're doing this? Okay." So I just want to make sure that everybody's in a position to stay dry and that they've got dry clothes to put back on.
Perfect.
So you're experiencing this in the best way possible. And I do want to add, because I asked my husband about the men's bathrooms in Tokyo Disney, and they do still have pretty standard urinals. The stalls that are in the bathroom sound pretty comparable to what I've described in the women's bathrooms. There's just less. So still a stall with a bidet and no gaps between the doors. But the men's and women's bathrooms, especially in Tokyo Disney, usually have baby changing stations, which I think
So
is so, so wonderful.
yeah.
And when we were talking about this, it reminded me that I should add that there are usually child-sized urinals in the women's bathroom, which I think is
That's
also
so
excellent.
nice.
I just really appreciated how logical this was set up for parents. Like, I just think that that's lovely. And there's just, like I said at the beginning, there's so much of this that I wish we could just take back to the States,
I
because it just makes sense. Like,
Right.
why wouldn't you have a baby changing station in the men's bathroom as well, having a small urinal there? Like, it
Right.
just, I, I love that that is something that is a part of the bathrooms there.
Yeah, and it's so few and far between in US public restrooms that you find baby changing stations on the men's side. So I appreciate that as a parent. And I know that my husband will too, because it's very frustrating when he's like, I can also take care of my child, but now I'm
Mhm.
forced to not take care of my child because I don't have the means to in a sanitary way. So,
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I do wanna add, if you are uncomfortable about the idea of a bidet, every bathroom that I went in, there was also always toilet paper. I don't know, so I just if that is something that you're uncomfortable with, in the end, it is still a toilet. There is still toilet paper that you can and should use in the stalls. So,
either way, you're good to go.
yes, I have that as a
Literally.
little tag at the end of mine that just like because I think that in some I think in videos that I would see as a kid in like really like high class bathrooms, just really extravagant looking things that people would talk about, that you wouldn't necessarily see where the toilet paper was if it was there. And so it wasn't something that I thought about. So like if that's something you're worried about and you know that you're never going to want to try to use a bidet, that's fine.
Right.
There's toilet paper. You're going to be great. It's a toilet at the end of the day.
You got this. It's gonna be awesome. Okay, I think are we through with
We are done with bathrooms. We're
our
all
bathroom
done.
talk?
We're
Perfect.
all
Hey,
done.
but like you said, it's important to know, especially if you're gonna be traveling with family, with kids, with even like I said, teens and young adults that have not ever experienced that before. Prep them
Absolutely.
ahead of time. So, okay,
Mhm.
moving on. What is our next item on our things to know before we visit Tokyo?
Our next thing is about the rides. Now, I knew that there were a lot of really cool and unique rides in Tokyo. There was a really cool Beauty and the Beast ride, the rides in Fantasy Springs, but I had not realized that there were rides in Tokyo Disney that were basically carbon copies of other rides that existed. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It was just something that I was very surprised by and was taken aback. So some of these include PhilharMagic, which the change being that it's in Japanese, but it is the exact same video. Star Tours, same thing. It's all in Japanese. But the queue was even the same, with the exception of the loading process into Star Tours. But like the big room where you're seeing the boarding times and C3PO and R2D2 are there. Same scenario, same layout. We did still get to hear Alice and Janney's voice doing the onboarding in English, which I loved because
Oh,
I
that's
love Alice and
awesome.
Janney. But for the most part, everything else was in Japanese. And Toy Story Midway Mania was the other one that was like pretty much the same. I was still quoting the ride in English because it was just Ben and I there. And so I was like, I am not your mother.
Mother,
Break those
break those
plates.
plates. I was just
Um,
like, that's amazing. I want to hear that in Japanese now. I'm gonna need to find a POV video of that one.
well, I don't know whether or not it's the same script or not. I would
Right,
assume it is because it's the same video, but like
right.
it might be some
Slightly
other like
different.
culturally relevant,
Right.
like I'm not your mother specific. Like I don't know whether or not that like has the same like slightly comedic effect in
Right.
Japanese or if there's
Right.
a better way to kind of
Yeah.
make that joke. But and then there are other rides that are not the exact same but pretty comparable. So Pinocchio and Haunted Mansion have small differences but are generally feeling like the same ride. Snow White is the way that I've been told by Kate, our friend, the Disney Cicerone, who used to be on this podcast, that the Snow White version in Tokyo is the way it used to be in, I believe, Disneyland in California,
Mm.
which is to say there is no happy ending for the ride, and you just end at the witch scene in the cliffs. I was very distraught, and I made a noise of indignation when I got to the end of it. I was just like, "What? We're just done?" And we were on the ride with somebody else who did not speak Japanese, but did not speak English either. And when I made my noise of indignation, they turned around in agreement with me because they were just like, what is happening? So universally, we were upset that it just ended the way that it did. But other than that, the ride is basically the same.
I
And
don't
Soarin' in the US, but Soaring in Tokyo is also the same video for the most part, but at the end, you're ending in Japan and instead of California or Orlando. The difference being, and why we thought it might be a different ride, is because the outside is themed wildly different. In the US, it's very much you've got flight attendants that are, you know, helping you board onto a plane where you're experiencing this. That's a poor summary of what Soarin' is like in the US. But there is like a Because of the theming of Tokyo DisneySea, the setup for the ride is like you're in, I guess, like colonial America, like when
Oh.
flight is first being developed. Um,
Hmm.
and it's the technology for it is really cool. The pre-show has you in a room with a painting of a woman with a hawk. And then when the pre-show starts, it just morphs into a video and it really looks like a painting. Like it was just like stunning because then all of a sudden the bird just flies off and you're just like, oh, whoa. And it's really cool. And the whole video is in Japanese, but the implication is that they're talking about the way that like flight has developed and
Hmm.
changed. And I think the idea is that they're like dreaming of what flight could look like in the future, because all of the art that you're surrounded by is what looks like early like Wright brothers planes,
Yeah.
and where you've got
Interesting.
people just kind of sitting in the open. So it was then interesting to me that when we sat down on the ride, it was the same kind of room that we were used to, and the video was like the exact same. It was the Soarin' Around the World, not Soarin' Over California.
Okay.
And then you end up at the end seeing the Tokyo skyline and getting to see Tokyo Disney. So it's very cool, loved it. And we actually got pulled at the very end of the night. We were walking out, and a manager walked up to us and she was like, "Did you guys get to do soaring while you were here today?" And we were like, "Yeah, we loved it a lot." And she's like, "Do you want to go on it again?" And we're like, "What?" And we
Yes.
looked at the time and it was like 15 minutes after park closed, like the line was closed. And she was just like, "Come on." And sent us down the elevator. And I guess this is just like a way that they make magic for
Oh, I
people.
love.
We did it with just us and one other family that had like 8 people in it. And we had the ride to ourselves. It was wild. And I was just
So
like
cool.
so shook. It was really, really cool. And it meant that we got to take in some of those really cool details where the paintings would kind of morph into videos. And so it I love that ride in the US
Yeah.
just as much as I love it anywhere. Like I will always go on it. So it it felt new and familiar at the same time.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of why I wanted to include this as a bullet point that like there's a lot that's the same, but it's still a lot of fun even though it's
Right.
familiar.
Did they have the scents for Soarin'
Yes.
better than what we get in Orlando? Because I feel like Orlando is very hit or miss with those.
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned that because there are scents in PhilharMagic, and I had known in
There
Orlando.
are?
Yes, wait, did you not know this?
It's been a little while since I've done it. I don't remember any scents.
Okay, so okay. Whew. So my understanding, let me back up. My understanding of the parks in Orlando, like or the experiences in Orlando, both PhilharMagic and Soaring, is that the scents kind of over time got like mixed together and they weren't
Mm.
always like at the same potency that
Yeah.
you were always like getting the intended effect. In Soaring in Orlando, you're getting like it's like an orangey scent and like a foresty kind of scent. I feel like there's like two like that I really only ever remembered smelling. And then in PhilharMagic, the scene in the beginning with Be Our Guest,
Yeah.
there's a pie that comes towards you on the screen.
Okay.
And then there are little like animated like scent like smoke figures that kind of come out towards you.
Yes.
And
Okay.
theoretically, you're supposed to be able to smell pie.
That's
I only
familiar.
smelled something vaguely sweet, but I could tell that like it felt like the timing was off in Orlando. Like
Mm.
the
Mm.
pie would come up and then beat, beat, then the scent would come out at you.
Right.
Everything worked in Disney or in Tokyo Disney, like,
Yeah.
and there was more than just that scent, which is why I say everything worked because it taught me that there's more than just the pie scent. And I turned to my husband and I was like, "What?" Like, I just like there was a second scent in the Beauty and the Beast room, and then there was maybe one other that I'm not remembering off the top of my head.
Yeah.
But I was just so shook because it felt like I was just getting a new level of detail.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't know what like the difference is if they just have like a different sprayer mechanic
Right.
or if it just requires a different level of upkeep or
Or it
I don't
just
know. And
functions better in general.
right. Well, I don't know. And this is a really good point to mention that Tokyo Disney is owned by another company and they license those rights from Disney. And so
Mhm.
there are some small ways in the parks that are just managed differently than the parks in the US and from Disneyland Paris
Right.
because it's just being staffed by a different team. There's just a different energy that's going into the park. And part of that is because in Tokyo, they're trying to make sure that it accommodates what Japanese guests are expecting, what the local guests
Right.
are expecting. And so there are other cultural ways that you can see that across the park. And I think that that's really cool. And I love that. And I love the way that they've kind of interpreted the things that are familiar to me as a guest of the US parks more regularly. So
Right.
I was just kind of blown away by getting to pick out all of the details, like when it's different, when it's not, what's different about it.
Yeah. I'm excited for future episodes when we talk more about the rides and what they were like and compare and contrast. I'm so excited for that. Okay. But we got to keep going because we got to get through the end of
Mhm.
your list.
Mhm. Yep, because I could wax poetic about the Beauty and the Beast ride. I cried every time I was on it,
Oh,
but I digress. That's a teaser for a future episode.
perfect. Okay,
So
let's move on to, let's see, we're on number 7, I think, of our
yes,
10 things
yes.
to know before you visit Tokyo Disney.
My seventh tip is about water. I knew that like you could access water in Japan, like you could access water anywhere. Like what kind of question is that? They don't sell water on the menus in
Oh,
mostly anywhere in Japan. We went to other like restaurants and different places and water was never listed. And it's
interesting.
wild to me. You will in Tokyo Disney, there is usually a fountain somewhere, and you just have to ask where you could like refill your water bottle or get like a little cup and fill that up with water. But it was just like I think a lot of it is from an eco-friendly standpoint that like they're not selling bottled water and contributing to plastic waste, which I appreciate. But I just it was not something that would have occurred to me before the trip to research because it was just like of course I'll be able to get water somewhere. Like I just like I didn't really think about the
Right.
details behind all of that. And so I was really really surprised that like it was never on the menu. So the Japanese water word for water is mizu. Mizu is the romanization. So mi and zu. So if you are holding a cup and you just say mizu, like or like sumimasen, mizu, like they will absolutely know what you're looking for and point you in the right direction. So,
So
um,
interesting.
right?
Hmm. Yeah, that's not something I would have ever considered either because we're so used to, oh yeah, any Disney park you can find water multiple places. They've got water fountains, they've got, bottle refills. You can go to quick services and get a cup of water or whatever. So I that's also something that I would not have thought about.
Right? Yeah. And most of the stations have something with like a little faucet that you can
Mhm.
fit a water bottle under or a cup under. So it's once you know where it is, it's excellent, and you never have an issue getting water. It's just
Yeah.
finding it initially once you get there.
Right. Right. Doesn't it's not as readily available, kind of. You have to ask a couple times before you figure it out.
Yeah, because it's kinda tucked away, usually around a
Mm.
corner where it's, like, out of the way, and it's normally by, like, a trash can and, like, the other things, like, where they would have napkins and stuff like that, but
Mhm.
it's not at every station where there's a trash can, it's usually
Mm.
just one.
Hmm. Interesting. Okay, so I think you've got some more information about food for us next, right?
Yes. So
Okay.
there's lots of versatility when it comes to food, but I wanted to make sure to add this point, especially if you have kids that are accustomed to food that is familiar to them, or if you have allergies, that you will not have any difficulty whatsoever finding food that is familiar to you. You will be able to find french fries, you will be able to find chicken nuggets. I say this as someone who has a lot of dietary restrictions, and french fries are like the safest food for me. As much as I wish that I could be adventurous and partake in all kinds of cultural food, I typically can't. It's just like a risk for me that if I want to continue enjoying my vacation, like it's just not the best idea for me personally. So french fries are my lifeblood. Like I and I wish that it were different because I understand that I sound probably kind of boring that I eat french fries like every day that I'm in the parks, but it's just something that I know that my body can tolerate, and it is
Right.
usually cooked the same way and without any other, weird ingredients. So I absolutely empathize with kids that are not accustomed to eating things outside of their regular food because I don't want to refer to it as like a picky eater because like every picky kid, quote unquote picky, is attracted to specific food. Like it's not necessarily like something that is specifically American or whatever else. Like I guess I refer to it specifically as comfort food. Like
Yeah.
if you're looking for something that is familiar to what you eat every day, you will absolutely be able to find that, and you will also be able to find something new. Like it is very easy to please all members of your party. My husband was able to try new things, and I was able to find my familiar things, and it was no stress. And I have been in the stateside parks and been stressed about that before. And so it was really nice that it was very dependable, I guess you could say, in Tokyo, that we could always find something somewhere for me.
That's so nice. And I think the US parks especially are known for being pretty good about allergies. Did you find that over in Tokyo as well?
So, yes and no. So, I never experimented with specifically altering something that's on the menu,
Okay.
which is something that I do in the US, especially in Orlando, where like I will order a gluten-free pizza with no sauce, and it's just literally the gluten-free crust and cheese. And anytime that you order anything allergy friendly that isn't off of the menu, they usually have to have you talk to a coordinator or a chef specifically for legal reasons.
Mhm.
And I was not trying to risk that in Japan. However, they do a very good job of putting out more allergen information than they do in the States. So by that I mean in the US, I believe there are 6 major ingredients that restaurants are required to list, or like nutritional labels are required to list whether or not exists in the food. I think that the US parks expand that. I think that it's maybe 10. Tokyo Disney has maybe 20 or more on their website that you can filter by. And it includes like different types of fish or apples or like gelatin, like not
Mm.
just your major allergens like wheat and nuts and things like that. And so on the website, you can sort by allergen or you can sort by restaurant, and you can kind of look and see what's available to you. It is not super cohesive with the app where you would do your mobile order. So you kind of have to toggle back and forth between the two to figure out what will work for you. But I was very pleasantly surprised by the amount of information that was there. And they also have dedicated allergy meals that you can order at specific restaurants that are designed around avoiding some of those major allergens. And you can just order that as that specific meal entirely as of itself. And I think that is their way of getting around like people that would necessarily need to talk to a chef, because
Right.
I got the impression that that is not something that their system is equipped to do. I would love to be wrong, but when I was kind of watching other people in line in different scenarios and things, that didn't seem to be what happened. So that is generally my experience. I also personally brought a lot of food into the park and was able to eat that as well. They
Nice.
have a downtown Disney equivalent called Expiari, and there's actually a little mini supermarket inside of
Hmm.
Expiari. And I bought food that I kept in the room and had like on lunch breaks and stuff and eat for
Mhm.
breakfast, and was able to bring things into the park. So I would highly recommend exploring that if you're stressed about food. There was so much in there, and I just had Google Translate on my phone with the image version, and I could just translate the package ingredients of everything that I was looking at.
Yeah, and I imagine if you were needing to talk to a chef or a supervisor or someone in the Tokyo parks, you definitely are gonna wanna make sure you have a translator of some sort, whether digital or whatever, with you, because you want to make sure that you are conveying your allergy concerns correctly to whoever you're speaking to make sure that you're safe when it comes to all of that, so
What I've seen other people do, I don't personally do, because the list of allergens that I have to avoid because it's a digestive disorder and not an allergy is too long for me to use this solution. But what
right.
a lot of people do will create a little card with an explanation of what they're allergic to, what they're trying to avoid, and that card is in the target language of wherever they're visiting. Some,
That's smart.
believe that there are shops on Etsy that will sell this, but you can also make your own. I find that you might want to like cross-reference double check with some other resource on whether or not it's a correct translation if you're
Right.
doing it yourself. But I think that for a lot of people, it's easier to just be able to hand somebody something, and then you're not trying to remember in the moment all of the things that you need to type into a translating app to then hand your phone over. Like it's already ready for you. I think a lot of people will laminate that and
Yeah.
just kind of keep it on a key ring with them wherever they go. And I think that that's a really handy idea.
Yeah, that's super smart. That's super smart. And even if you're someone who has maybe several restrictions or you're just looking for your specific safe foods or comfort foods, like you could also list something like that on there too if you choose to. But having a little cheat sheet for yourself, I think is definitely a good idea because in the moment you don't want to forget something.
Absolutely. And that actually leads me to my ninth point, which is about mobile ordering, which so there are table service restaurants, there's counter service restaurants in Japan, and there are lots of counter service restaurants that have mobile order as an option. And I just like they do in the States. What was interesting to me is in Japan, in Tokyo Disney, it seemed that those mobile order time slots filled up far more quickly and
Hmm.
far more in advance than they did in my experience in the US thus far. It's almost as if they're using it like they would a table reservation and like
Yeah.
booking that time where they're planning to eat. So a lot of times because typically, especially when you and I have visited the parks, we try to avoid eating in that 11 to 1 time frame.
Right.
And that can help you avoid the crowds. But when we were trying to figure out when we were going to go, especially because the parks were not opening until 9, which meant that we had a hard time, like, figuring out when we were going to eat because we'd not been doing stuff for too long, that we were still hungry at that
Right.
11 to 1 time frame. And then we would find that those mobile order slots were booked. But we were ready to eat right at 11 and we would walk up and it was empty. And that was really exciting because you'd think that when all of the mobile order slots are booked, that you would encounter a really long line at the
Hmm.
restaurant. But that was not necessarily the case. And that was really surprising and encouraging to me. I do want to add, I have a note in here, and somebody mentioned in my chat as well, that there are a few locations that are mobile order only and there are no lines allowed. However, I did not encounter the same kind of like caps with how many mobile orders that they allowed. And we could just like walk up and then be like, hey, you have to mobile order. And then we would stand there and make our mobile order. If when we go a deep dive on restaurants, I will do the research. But if my memory serves, that was mostly only at Fantasy Springs because it was new. And when we were there, they had just changed who was allowed into Fantasy Springs. Previously, you basically had to get a virtual return time and a virtual queue. And once you left the Fantasy Springs area, you could not re-enter the Fantasy Springs area.
Wow.
And it was their way of doing crowd control, basically.
Right.
And maybe like 2 or 3 weeks before our trip, they lifted that, which was very exciting because it meant that we did not have to stress about trying to get a return time for
Right.
Fantasy Springs
Yeah.
and that whole section of the park. But it was definitely a thing at the quick service location there, at least one of them for Snuggly Duckling was the one where we encountered it routinely. And I think that it's just because it was in that section of the park. But it is gorgeous inside there, and I'm very excited to talk about it in a future episode because the theming in there is is great. It just feels like you're walking into the set of the movie at the Snuggly Duckling.
Yeah. Now, when you were doing things like mobile ordering and such like that on the app, I'm assuming, but I could be very wrong, that your app was in English when you were ordering?
Yes.
Okay. Just curious
So
because I wasn't sure. As I was thinking about that, I was like, "Oh, that would be something to make sure that you think about if whether or not you're gonna be able to read the app in English or if it's gonna be both or if you get just Japanese."
Well, that's a good bonus point, and something that I didn't even think about because it was something that I learned before I went on the trip. So if
Yeah.
you're somebody that's listening to podcasts about things, you will probably encounter it the same way, where you're downloading the park app far before you go on your trip because you want to explore it and click around. And so I learned when I downloaded that I think because I downloaded it in the American App Store, that it
Yeah,
just defaulted to English. I don't
that
really
makes
think
sense.
that I ever had to choose that as my language. And especially once I had downloaded it, like, I didn't have to select English every time.
Right.
So that was really convenient.
Okay.
And I do wanna add, somebody else in my comment section brought it up here, that there are occasionally credit card issues with the app.
Mhm.
We tested whether or not our credit cards were connected prior to when we went.
Yeah.
Um, and so depending on your bank, depending on your credit card, they might have to do some verification. This is especially important if you are trying to like buy any of the Lightning Lane equivalents, like the paid passes in the park. So something to keep in mind. It was not something that we personally encountered, but it is something that I would read a lot on, like Reddit, for example, that would
Right.
happen. But all of that will be in English on the app. So if you're uh, troubleshooting is the word that I'm looking for. If you're troubleshooting different issues in the app,
Mhm.
all of that will be in English, which is nice.
No, that's helpful to know, especially if you're someone who is wanting to look at menus ahead of time. We've been talking about allergies and mobile ordering and all that kind of stuff. Then you have the ability to look at the menus ahead of time, read the descriptions of the, different entrees and things like that in English. So that way, when you go to the parks, you already have a clue about what it is you're trying to order, which is very
Yeah.
helpful.
Absolutely, and the website is really thorough, and they do have, I can't remember whether or not they have a dedicated English version of the website or if my Google was just on top of auto-translating it, but
Right.
I never had an issue navigating the Tokyo Disney website, which is really the most important thing, that it was not difficult to navigate, and, it was very easy to kind of use that in tandem with the app.
Yeah, I feel like in my experience in like research that I've done on different international park websites, there's always like in the top, there's always the option of what language you want to view it in. And I feel like on some of them I have had to go and like manually select for it to be in English. Like when I was doing research on Disneyland Paris or things like that, like I had to go up and manually select it. But either way, there's
Yeah.
definitely an English version available if you're doing research beforehand.
I will say that I had a far easier time navigating the Tokyo Disney website than I did the Disneyland Paris website. So if you're accustomed to dealing with one over the other, I had a far easier time finding information, navigating, troubleshooting. Everything was easier when it came to Tokyo compared to Disneyland Paris. So if that was something that you've been frustrated by in the past, know that you may not be as frustrated with Tokyo. I certainly hope that is not the case.
Yeah, well, that's good to note, good to know. Okay, are we at number 10? Did
We
we cover everything with mobile orders?
We did. We are at number
Okay.
10. And number 10 is about the evening shows. And this is something that surprised me personally. I do want to preface and say that I missed some of the evening shows because they are quick to cancel for high winds, which
Mm,
I appreciate as a safety concern, especially in Tokyo Disney Sea, because they have their show on the water and there are live performers and they're trying to keep them safe. But I am very accustomed to seeing a show projected on a castle and then the fireworks happen after that. And in Tokyo Disney, the order of that is reversed.
mm,
I wanted to mention this specifically because I think it's important that if you have kids or somebody else in your party that needs noise reduction for fireworks, you're going to need to reverse that. I know that for the castle show audio levels, especially in Disney World, I usually can't have something in my ear or like I'll miss some of the smaller details in the quiet moments of the show. For me personally, that's just the way that my ears work. And so I don't know that I would have had my stuff out and ready in Tokyo Disney realizing that. And part of that is probably me just not retaining that information because I do believe that once you look at the name of the show and read the description, it will explicitly say fireworks or like show on the castle or like something along those lines. However, at the very end of the day, I was not really retaining much at all. I was just, happy with my popcorn, sitting enjoying the vibes near the Baymax ride and just kind of coasting through life, and I was just really surprised that all of a sudden fireworks were happening when I was expecting to see, like, castle show and, like, happy fun music.
great.
So I also wanna add that the fireworks are shared by Disneyland and DisneySea, which is maybe part of why it is reversed in Tokyo Disneyland,
Mhm.
because it's the same fireworks show, so once you've seen it you've seen one, you've seen them all. I'm just kidding. That's a Singing in the Rain reference. Um, but it's the same nighttime spectacular, just because the
Yeah.
parks are so close together that
Yeah.
there's really no way around it being
Hmm.
the same.
Interesting. Did you watch it from both sides? I'd be so fascinated to know, like, if you're more on one side of the park than the other, if it's a different experience.
So I was only physically in each of the parks once when they did the fireworks.
Yeah.
So we spent 2 days in Disney Sea and 2 days in Disneyland. And in one of each of the days in each park, the show had been canceled.
Hmm.
So we had planned on, and unfortunately, it had happened in Disney Sea on our first day. And based on when we were hungry and Frozen was down and we had like a return time, like
Mhm.
a replacement for our like paid pass,
Yeah.
we were trying to make sure that we got on it. And we were there at the end of the night and we just did not have time to like find a good spot. Now we ended up watching most of the fireworks from near Fantasy Springs
Mhm.
and we got to hear the music and see the show. And it was basically just like listening to music and fireworks in the sky. So if you're
Yeah.
accustomed to seeing like the in Orlando, watching the Magic Kingdom fireworks from like the Polynesian, it very much had that vibe. Like you're just kind of
Gotcha.
hanging out in the park, you can hear the music and you're seeing most of the show.
Mhm.
In Disney Sea, they don't really have the same kind of focal point that a lot of other parks will do when they do fireworks.
Right.
There is a big volcano that exists and uh, inadvertently kind of becomes the focal point, but it does not, in my opinion, have the same effect. Now, maybe I would feel differently if I'd seen the fireworks from over there because you'd get the reflection on the water that's near that volcano.
Mhm.
But the other night that we saw the fireworks in Disneyland, that was our second night. And so we only ever got, and that first night, they'd canceled the parade earlier in the day. They'd canceled like all kinds of things because of the wind. And
Mm.
so we'd only really gotten that one time to experience it. And we were watching it from to the right of the castle because we were just like trying to ride other things after the show ended. We were trying to book it back to Small World and
Yeah.
ride it again because the Small
Position
World has a
yourself.
fruit takeover.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And then we didn't have a crowd to beat. It was actually really great because we could lean on the railing the whole time. There was nobody around us, and you could still see enough of the castle projection from the side. But we were just kind of strolling over, and I heard fireworks go off, and I was like, "Did we miss the whole castle show?" I was just like, "The timing doesn't make sense to me. We shouldn't have missed the whole castle show, but the fireworks are happening." And so we stood there and hung out and watched the fireworks. And then the castle show started. I was like, "Oh, good, we didn't miss it." I just
Hooray.
like normally we're a little more like on top of things, but it was our last day of a 2-week trip, and we were just kinda coasting on vibes and kinda going wherever our heart and our feet let us go
Yeah.
because we were pretty tired, but I was really glad that we caught it because the Castle Show's song was surprisingly all in English,
Oh,
and I just had a lot of really positive, warm, fuzzy feelings
yeah.
about the song, and it reminded me a lot of Wishes, if anybody is familiar with that. It has the same kind of energy,
Mhm.
the same kind of, like, theming in terms of, uh, deciding something in your heart and choosing to go after it, and I just really love that specific type of theme and energy, and I just ugh, I got the warm fuzzies talking about it. Imma go listen to it after we're done recording.
Well, it's so interesting to me because, like, Magic Kingdom previously had more of a separation between, like, the castle projection show and then the nighttime fireworks show, which also had projections. But right now with Happily Ever After, it's kinda just all in one. So
Yeah.
I like, personally for me, that it's when it's separate because I'm not a huge fireworks girly. Like, I will watch them, but I would much rather see the castle projections, just my personal preference. So, like, knowing that I have the option to, like, roll up after the fireworks are over and just watch the castle projections, I'm like, "Ooh, I like that. That's
Yeah.
nice."
Yeah. I'm really partial to a show that is that has a story, and
Yeah.
so I don't mind the fireworks if there's a story involved. There was a show that happened in Disneyland Paris in 2012 with an anniversary of the park, and it was basically castle projection and fireworks, and there were water fountains in front of the castle, and it had, Peter Pan and Wendy speaking to one another, like, Wendy spoke in French and Peter spoke in English, and they were kind of narrating this show, and so that included the fireworks as well, and so I was like, "Oh, I am absolutely on board with this."
Yeah.
And so I agree. I like having just like some I like having the plot
Yeah.
somewhere to follow along with. It makes the fireworks more exciting to me personally too.
Yes. Okay, I think we got through all 10 of our just quick, somewhat quick 10 things to know before you visit Tokyo. Like we mentioned, we will go more in depth on a lot of these and talk about the parks and the different areas and rides and food and where to stay and tickets and all that normal stuff that we always talk about in Mom Street for every park that we talk about. But this was kind of your quick list of 10 things to know. Stevie, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
So my final thoughts are that there's a lot that's different about Tokyo Disney, but I think that it's all stuff that's pretty easy to navigate once you figured it out. I could talk about how much I love this park for forever, but in the interest of keeping me on topic, I'm trying to stick to themes. If there's something that you want to know specifically about in the future, absolutely let us know, and I will do my best to answer it on a future episode because, like I said at the start, I plan to be a menace about all of this. But I really think that once you once you learn for the first time, it's really easy to get accustomed to whatever it is that's different in Tokyo Disney. Like it's different, but the learning curve isn't too bad. Like once you know, it's just like, oh, I got this, and it's fine. It's not something that would take this to kind of acquire. If that does that make sense? Am I just like rambling about goodness knows what? Okay.
No, I got you. You're good.
I
You're
think
good.
that like I'm thinking about, like, especially learning, like, Genie Plus in the US, like, in for Orlando, like, and all of the different, like, multi-pass things, like, you learn about it, and then you gotta learn some more before you really get the hang of it. But I really think that with a lot of the stuff that's in Tokyo Disney, like, once you do learn, it's just like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I got this. I can manage." So I really think that while it might seem intimidating at first, once you're there, it's really not super stressful, and it's very easy to have a wonderful magical time.
But I feel like that's really reassuring to some of our listeners who, like myself included, who I'm like, that feels really intimidating. I don't know that I could ever do it without like tons and tons and tons and tons of research, which, like, obviously, we always suggest doing your research. Find a travel agent that maybe has been or has booked other trips to these parks overseas. Find some friends, find Mom Street USA friends that can help you with the things that you need to know. But I think knowing that it's not as cumbersome and not as overwhelming as it may seem on the surface is helpful to know.
Absolutely, especially if you're traveling internationally for the first time with kids, like, internationally on its own, like, if it's just, like, you and one other person can still feel like a lot, but managing other people on top of that, it's absolutely overwhelming, but I really think that Japan is a really great it's like, even a first international trip, if that's the first place that you go, it is just so friendly to tourists. It's very much like the energy that you put in, you're gonna get back, and I was just so sad to leave because it just felt so comforting to be there, you know? Like,
Mhm.
I knew what to expect, I could get around, like and it was just so lovely. I'm so excited to continue talking about Tokyo Disney. It's just it was such a wonderful experience. I don't know when I'll go back, I just know that I want to go back.
But I think we're all excited to hear about it because there's something to be said for I can sit here and research all day about Tokyo Disney and I can tell you the facts and the numbers and all of that type of stuff, but hearing it from somebody who's actually been there puts a totally different feel on the information that's being presented. It's like circling way back to the beginning, like we talked about some of the other podcasts and blogs and things that you can read. Some of them you'll get tourist perspectives, some of them you'll get local perspectives. So I think having all of those perspectives can be helpful. And I think we're looking forward to what else you have to share with us and what else you experienced and are, excited to talk about because it makes us excited when you're excited.
Yay! Yeah, absolutely,
I love it.
absolutely.
So, all that being said, it will be a few episodes before we circle back to Stevie again. We've been a little kind of crazy with our schedules with between travel and all sorts of other things going on. Our next podcast episode, we will be doing another hub episode. And interesting enough, we're not coming back to the US parks yet. We're actually going to be returning back to our Universal conversation with Duck and Jess. So, that is what is coming up on our next episode. And then after that, we will go back to the US parks and talk a little refresher on lightning lanes. So if you are someone that is like, I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to lightning lanes and multipass and all those types of things, I am your girl, and I will be talking about that here in a few episodes. So if you've got questions or need help with that, send me a message. You can always reach out to us, momstreetusa@gmail.com, or you can find us on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook at Mom Street USA. You can reach out to us there. And like we always mention, we do have a channel on our good friend Kirk at Walrus Carp on his Discord. We have a Mom Street channel there that you are more than welcome to reach out to us on there as well. All of that information can be found in the link in any of our social media bios. So take a look at that if you're like, I need help, but I don't know where to go. Find us somewhere and it will lead you to where you need to be. So, with all that being said, I think we have wrapped for this. We'll put a little pin in the Tokyo Disney conversation because we will be revisiting it again in the future. I know Stevie is already wheels are turning for what she wants to talk about next, I'm sure.
I literally have the songs that they play on the Baymax ride, like, going in my head because I was listening to it as I was working out, and I'm just, like, jamming in my own little Tokyo Disney world, so I absolutely am thinking about all of the other things that
I
I'm
love
very
it.
excited to share.
I love that. And we will definitely have to post a few photos on our Instagram. So be sure you're following us there if you want to see some of Stevie's photos from her trip that kind of correspond with maybe some of the things we heard about today. But until next time, thank you guys so much for joining us for this episode of Mom Street USA. We greatly appreciate your support. Thank you to our friends who are here live as we record this on TikTok. Thank you to those of you who are listening after the fact of us recording it. We appreciate all of you. And I hope you all have a wonderful week, and we will catch you next time on Mom Street USA. Bye, everyone.